Good morning. Thank you all for coming to our press conference to announce the filing of an IRS complaint against the Commission on Presidential Debates. My name is George Farah. I am the Executive Director of Open Debates and the author of a newly released book on the presidential debate process titled No Debate. With me here today are some of the leading citizen activists in the movement to reform the presidential debates. Meredith Mcgehee, the Executive Director of the Alliance for Better Campaigns and former Senior Vice President of Common Cause. Dr. Pat Choate, the former vice presidential candidate of the Reform Party and director of the Manufacturing Policy Project, Richie, the executive director of the Center for Voting and Democracy, and Mark Clack, the deputy director of public campaign and the former field director of the NAACP. The Commission on Presidential Debates is a private corporation that has sponsored every televised general election presidential debate since 1988, and it has announced its intention to sponsor the 2004 general election presidential debates. The Commission on Presidential Debates is a tax-exempt 501c3 organization. The 501c3 section of the Internal Revenue Code prohibits such organizations from, quote, participating or intervening directly or indirectly in any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for public office. This prohibition is absolute. In respect to candidate debates, the IRS has stated that organizations, quote, may sponsor debates or forums to educate voters. But if the forum or debate shows a preference for or against a certain candidate, it becomes a prohibited activity, end quote. The Commission on Presidential Debates is required to be nonpartisan, and it can only engage in nonpartisan voter education efforts. But the Commission on Presidential Debates is bipartisan, not nonpartisan, and it certainly participates and intervenes directly and indirectly on behalf of and in opposition to candidates for public office. The Commission on Presidential Debates vigorously supports the Republican and Democratic candidates for the presidency, and it opposes third-party independent candidates for the presidency. In fact, the Commission on Presidential Debates was created by the Republican and Democratic parties for the Republican and Democratic parties. On November 25th, 1985, Republican National Chairman Frank Farah and Democratic National Chairman Paul Kirk co-authored a one-page memorandum of understanding. It states, "It is our bipartisan view that a primary responsibility of each major political party is to educate and inform the American electorate of its fundamental philosophy and policies, as well as its candidates' positions on critical issues. One of the most effective means of fulfilling that responsibility is through nationally televised joint appearances conducted between the presidential and vice presidential nominees of the two major political parties and vice presidential nominees of the two major political parties. Therefore, to better fulfill our party's responsibilities for educating and informing the American public and to strengthen the role of political parties in the electoral process, it is our conclusion that future joint appearances should be principally and jointly sponsored and conducted by the Republican and Democratic National Committees." In 1986, the Republican and Democratic National Committees actually ratified an agreement between Frank Farah and Paul Kirk for the parties to, quote, take over the presidential debates. 15 months later, Farah and Kirk incorporated the Commission on Presidential Debates. And that same day, the Republican and Democratic parties issued a press release describing the commission as, quote, a bipartisan, nonprofit, tax-exempt organization formed to implement joint sponsorship of general election, presidential, and vice presidential debates starting in 1988 by the National Republican and Democratic committees between the respective nominees. For the next 18 months, Farah and Kirk simultaneously served as co-chairmen of the Commission on Presidential Debates and co-chairs of their respective major parties. Now, Farah and Kirk are still the co-chairs of the Commission on Presidential Debates. It's also worth noting that they're also registered lobbyists for multinational corporations. Kirk has lobbied on behalf of the pharmaceutical industry, and Farah is the nation's leading gambling lobbyist. He is the president of the American Gaming Association. The rest of the directors of the Commission on Presidential Debates are just loyal Democrats and Republicans, including former Republican Senator John Danforth, former Republican Senator Alan Simpson, Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg, the daughter of the late President John F. Kennedy, Republican Congresswoman Jennifer Dunn, and so on. These directors of the Commission on Presidential Debates ardently believe in the two-party system, and they're unabashedly contemptuous of third-party candidates. When I asked Alan Simpson if he thought independent and third-party candidates ought to be included in the presidential debates, he said, no, I think it's obvious that independent candidates just mess things up. The Commission on Presidential Debates, however, doesn't just ideologically support the major parties and their respective candidates. The Commission on Presidential Debates actually awards control of the presidential debates to the Republican and Democratic nominees. Every 4 years, to comply with federal regulations, the Commission on Presidential Debates publishes candidate selection criteria and proposes debate formats. But questions concerning third-party participation and debate formats are ultimately resolved behind closed doors between negotiators for the Republican and Democratic nominees. These negotiators draft secret debate contracts called Memoranda of Understanding that dictate precisely how the debates will be structured, from decreeing who gets to participate, to deciding who gets to ask all the questions, to even prohibiting the candidates from talking to each other and stipulating the heights of the podiums. All the Commission on Presidential Debates does is execute these agreements and shields the Republican and Democratic nominees from public accountability. Open Debates has secured copies of the secret 1992 and 1996 Memoranda of Understanding, and they're in the IRS complaint we are filing. And these documents